Welcome to Imran's Star Video, or as we call it, ISVi, the collaborative lens on Vancouver, unfiltered, unscripted, and powered by community. We're not just a voice behind the mic. We're a collective of creators, thinkers, storytellers, and city lovers coming together to spotlight the people, places, and energy that make Vancouver what it is. From coast, mountain skylines to neon-lit backstreets, we're covering everything from downtown buzz to the untold stories shaping our scene. You'll find us exclusively on YouTube. No algorithms, no filters, just real talk. For behind the scenes updates and chaotic brilliance in real time, follow us on TikTok and Instagram. So hit subscribe, drop a comment, and help us grow. From 100 to 10,000 subscribers and beyond. Because this isn't just our platform, it's yours too. Turn it up, get into it. Let's talk Vancouver. This is ISVi. When most people hear Premier League, they think about football, fancy haircuts, and grown men dramatically falling into the ground over mild shin contact. But in BC, our Premier League is way less glamorous and way more likely to impact your rent, your commute, and whether or not that the new hospital ever gets built. Because while Vancouver's aesthetic is all glass towers, overpriced sushi, and indie bookstores that double as performance spaces, the real power moves happen 100 kilometers away in Victoria, where BC's premiers make decisions that shape every inch of city life. Yes, you heard that right. The person in charge of a sleepy-looking parliament building full of questionable carpets and legislative shade has the power to determine whether your bus runs on time, your rent goes up, or your neighborhood gets swallowed by another condo called the Verve Assis. Every premier from the 80s austerity dads to the 2020s housing hawks has left their mark on Vancouver, whether we asked for it or not. Vancouver may think of itself as the cool, rebellious younger sibling of Canadian cities, all protests, bike lanes, and progressive dreams, but it's still deeply at the mercy of whoever's holding the premier's seat like it's a gamer chair from which they casually throttle transit funding and set property taxes. From Bill Bennett's expo-fueled concrete jungle vision to Gordon Campbell's let's sell the future and call it investment, to David Eby's current speed run through housing reform, Vancouver has basically been the premier's favorite pet project, punching bag, and political PR stunt all rolled into one. You want bike lanes? Better hope the premier isn't mad about that time we voted down the transit tax. You want affordable housing? Sorry, we already sold that land to an international holding company back in 2006. Oops. This isn't just a list of premiers and their policy portfolios. No, this is a deep dive into how BC's top boss has shaped life in Vancouver, often in ways so wild you'd think it was a satire script written by someone at their third cold brew. It's the story of ambitious mega projects, public outcries, real estate chaos, political scandal, and the occasional, wait, are they actually trying to fix this moment? So grab your compass card if it still works, check your rent payment status, and buckle up, because we're about to unpack how BC's premiers have been shaping your urban experience like it's a SimCity speedrun with unlimited developer credits. Before you ask, no, not the Canucks goalie, and definitely not your uncle who thinks Bitcoin is a personality, we're talking about Bill Bennett, BC's premier from 1975 to 1986, who rolled into office with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball and the swagger of a man who believed in concrete more than compassion. Bill Bennett was the kind of guy who looked at Vancouver and said, "This is nice, but what if it was shinier, louder, and covered in freshly poured cement?" and thus began one of the boldest infrastructure binges in BC history, the political equivalent of a midlife crisis, except instead of buying a motorcycle, he bought Expo 86, BC Place, and an entire transit system. Let's start with the big one, Expo 86. The massive world fair that would turn Falls Creek from a toxic industrial swamp into a temporary techno-utopia filled with robots, monorails, and foreign dignitaries politely pretending not to notice the smell. Bennett didn't just greenlight it, he supercharged it, betting that a 6-month festival with the Soviet Space Dome and a floating McDonald's would put Vancouver on the map. Spoiler, it did, and then it put half the waterfront into the hands of luxury condo developers. But Bennett's love for big moves didn't stop at global flexing. Enter the SkyTrain. That's right, the sleek, automated train you ride today while pretending not to make eye contact with anyone. It was Bennett's brainchild. Built for Expo but sold as the future of transit, the SkyTrain was his answer to congestion, pollution, and BC's crippling fear of buses. Sure, it came with a price tag that made accountants cry, but you can't spell futuristic without fiscally irresponsible, apparently. He also oversaw the construction of BC Place Stadium, Vancouver's giant inflatable sports dome, which at the time was the world's largest marshmallow lookalike. Critics called it excessive, expensive, and unnecessary, but Bill, he just called it visionary. And then probably walked away in slow motion while someone rolled out a fresh budget deficit behind him. But make no mistake, Bennett wasn't just about flashy projects, he was also the king of austerity, deregulation, and union showdowns. Under his sole credit government, BC saw massive cuts to social programs, aggressive anti-labor policies, and a general vibe that screamed, if you're poor, try working harder, or building a stadium, I guess. In Vancouver, this meant fewer supports for low-income residents, gutted housing programs, and the early whispers of the affordability crisis we now scream about over brunch. It also meant the city's landscape started shifting from working class weird to investment class sterile. So what did Bill Bennett leave behind for Vancouverites? A futuristic transit system that still works, mostly, a world fair that rebranded the city and then gentrified it into the stratosphere, and a legacy of mega projects that made Vancouver look like the future, while quietly steamrolling the present. Bill Bennett was bold, relentless, and allergic to nuance. He helped transform Vancouver, not necessarily for everyone, but definitely for those with hard hats, condos, or corporate interests. After the cement-drenched mega project happy reign of Bill Bennett, BC entered its post-infrastructure era, also known as Let's Try Empathy phase. Enter Mike Corcourt, former Vancouver mayor, urban planning nerd, and the kind of guy who probably knew how many bike racks were on each SkyTrain platform before stepping into the premier's office. Harcourt rolled into power like a chill West Coast dad who drinks fair trade coffee, composts aggressively, and actually reads the city's zoning bylaws for fun. He wasn't here for monorails and international spectacle. He wanted to build community sustainability and maybe even fix that whole housing situation before it exploded into a full-blown economic crisis. LOL. And he wasn't just talk. As a former mayor, Harcourt understood Vancouver in ways that made downtown developers mildly nervous and public housing advocates cautiously optimistic. He believed in densification, social services, and making cities work for people, not just for cranes and condo brochures. In many ways, he was Vancouver's urbanist king before being an urbanist was a LinkedIn flex. Under his leadership, BC saw new investments in social housing, community planning, and environmental policy, a trifecta of let's make the city livable before we sell it off to foreign investors. He pushed for smarter growth, transit friendly design, and actual attempts at poverty reduction. Basically, he was trying to fix the mess Bill Bennett left behind while politely whispering, could we maybe not bulldoze the neighborhood this time? But just as things started feeling semi hopeful, in walked the scandal dragon, Bingogate. Yes, it sounds like a rejected Netflix true crime series, but it was very real and very dumb. A fundraising scandal involving sketchy bingo revenue torched Harcourt's credibility, even though he wasn't directly involved. Still, in true Canadian fashion, he resigned to take responsibility, proving once again that BC politics is just high stakes drama wrapped in flannel and guilt. His exit left a mix of emotions: relief for the opposition, heartbreak for urbanists, and absolute confusion for anyone still trying to understand how a bingo hall fundraiser brought down the guy who wanted to save the city. He walked so today's politicians could run for accountability. Despite the premature end, Harcourt's influence on Vancouver lingered like incense in a Main Street yoga studio. His commitment to community-based planning and sustainability helped lay the groundwork for the kind of progressive policies that later premiers would either embrace, ignore, or rebrand as their own with fancier fonts. So yes, Harcourt might have not had Bennett's bombastic budget or Clark's media swagger, but he had vibes, vision, and a genuine desire to make Vancouver work for actual humans, and for that, we salute him. Even if the whole thing ended with a scandal involving pensioners and a bingo card. If Bill Bennett poured the concrete and Mike Harcourt planted the community gardens, then Gordon Campbell came in with a gold-plated blueprint and said, cool story, now tear it down and build condos. Serving as premier for an entire decade, which in BC politics is basically a lifetime, Campbell's reign was part Olympics, part deregulation fever dream, and part real estate cooked dystopia. Let's start with this vibe. Gordon Campbell was the kind of politician who could sell gentrification as urban revitalization and somehow make a tax cut feel like self-care. Polished, business-minded, and definitely the guy you'd find giving keynote speeches at innovation summits while quietly slashing social programs behind the scenes. He ran BC like a corporate CEO, and Vancouver was his favorite flagship brand. And what's a flagship brand without some glorious spectacle? Enter the 2010 Winter Olympics, also known as Vancouver's International Coming Out Party. If that party cost billions, came with militarized security, and evicted low-income people to make room for curling, while the world applauded our ability to fake being cheerful in sub-zero temperatures, Vancouverites got an elevated Canada line, a bunch of Olympic merch still floating around thrift stores, and an even higher cost of living. But Campbell didn't just build legacies, he also dismantled them. His government introduced sweeping cuts to welfare, public education, and social services, hitting the most vulnerable with the energy of someone saying, just bootstrap your way out of systemic inequality, bestie. Under his leadership, the downtown east side became more neglected, housing became more unaffordable, and Vancouver's identity slowly pivoted from gritty coastal creativity to Airbnb-friendly investment zone with artisanal soap shops. And yet, to his credit, Campbell did give us Canada's first carbon tax, an environmental flex so shocking it made Alberta blink twice. It was a bold revenue-neutral tax on fuel aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For a premier who was basically BC's poster boy for neoliberalism, this move was like watching your dad suddenly go vegan and nail it. The carbon tax became a model for other jurisdictions, even if it was mostly buried under all the economic damage control his other policies required. He also aggressively pushed P3s, public-private partnerships, like they were going out of style, which meant your local hospital, bridge, or SkyTrain expansion came with the side of corporate involvement, weird naming rights, and questionable accountability. It's It's like having your healthcare delivered by Uber. Efficient, but don't ask too many questions. Let's not forget, this was the era when condo towers became Vancouver's primary export. Under Campbell, zoning rules bent like yoga instructors, developers flourished like rooftop gardens, and suddenly everyone and their cousin was flipping condos like Pokemon cards. If you're wondering why a 400 square foot micro suite now costs $3,000 a month, you can thank the Gordon Campbell starter pack. But even political juggernauts trip. In 2010, Campbell's shiny neoliberal train slammed into a wall called the Harmonized Sales Tax, HST, a deeply unpopular move that unified British Columbians across class lines in mutual rage. After relentless public backlash, he resigned in 2011, leaving behind a legacy of polished infrastructure, gutted services, and a Vancouver skyline that could moonlight as a corporate screensaver. So what did Campbell give Vancouverites? An Olympic-fueled boost in global recognition and rents, a transit system with sparkle funded by cuts that stung, and a city reimagined as a luxury product instead of a place to actually live. In short, he made Vancouver world-class, just not for the people already living in it. If Gordon Campbell was your business-savvy uncle who ruined Christmas by explaining the stock market at dinner, Christy Clark was the polished media-trained cousin who showed up late, smiled for every camera, and left before anyone noticed. Nothing actually got done. Clark entered office with big charisma, bold heels, and the energy of someone who definitely beat you at networking, even if she had no intention of following up. Clark was all about branding, baby. Where previous premiers bulldozed or built, she carefully curated. Her vibe was business casual meets televised optimism, often framed as the jobs, LNG, and families premier. Though, if you ask Vancouverites how many of those jobs actually ended up here, you'd hear a long silence followed by a collective eye roll. One of her most iconic moments, the transit referendum disaster of 2015. Instead of just funding transit upgrades like a normal functioning government, Clark pulled the equivalent of a group project and said, "You decide." Vancouver was asked to vote on whether to increase taxes to fund things like more SkyTrain lines, buses, and general not being stuck for 45 minutes at commercial Broadway improvements. Unsurprisingly, the referendum flopped like a low-effort influencer apology video. Metro Vancouver's transit ambitions were left in a holding pattern while everyone tried to figure out who was actually in charge. But let's be clear, Clark wasn't just missing from the transit convo, she was practically on mute. While cities across the province begged for infrastructure support, Clark was so busy pushing liquefied natural gas like it was a Black Friday deal, promising an economic boom that somehow never quite made it to anyone's bank account. Vancouver, with its green branding and climate-sensitive voters, mostly got a headache, some pipeline tension, and the feeling that its urban challenges were really on her radar unless there was a photo op involved. And don't even get us started on housing. During her tenure, Vancouver's affordability crisis went from ouch to are we being punked? While international buyers flooded the market, locals were priced out of their own city. Clark's government responded by doing what every responsible leader does, waiting as long as possible before reluctantly dropping a foreign buyer tax and hoping we'd call it even. It was reactive, not proactive. Like slapping a band-aid on a volcano and hoping for the best. Clark also loved a good ribbon cutting and business deal. She was pro-corporate, pro-trade, and definitely gave CEO of British Columbia Energy, complete with all kind of campaign photo shoots where you stand in front of a shipping container and pretend it's policy. She framed herself as a champion of families, even as services like childcare, education, and housing spiraled into chaos like a downtown one-way street during a snowstorm. Her public persona was bubbly, polished, and media-savvy. She was the politician most likely to deliver a soundbite, pose for a selfie, and then deflect the hard questions with, "We're working on it." She stayed in office longer than most expected, mostly by charming the business community, baffling the opposition, and staying just vague enough to avoid committing to anything too specific. Eventually, she lost the 2017 election in a political slow-mo car crash of overconfidence, under-delivery, and a dramatic throne speech that tried to reverse engineer empathy after 6 years of corporate loyalty. It didn't work. The NDP and Greens teamed up like an unexpected crossover episode, and Clark was out. So what did Christy Clark leave Vancouver with? A failed transit referendum and years of stale and stalled progress, a housing crisis that ballooned while she blinked, a PR strategy so strong it almost convinced people things were getting better. In the end, Clark governed like a walking press release, smooth, shiny, strangely resistant to substance. Her impact in Vancouver was mostly defined by inaction, polished optics, and the lingering feeling that we were part of a branding campaign no one actually signed up for. If Christy Clark was the corporate stepmom who smiled through the chaos and pretended that she totally didn't forget your birthday, John Horgan came in like your emotionally available Gen X dad, flannel clad, slightly grumpy, and ready to fix the problem and the broken cabinet that's been squeaking since 2009. He didn't promise fireworks, he promised functionality, and for a while, it worked. Horgan was the kind of premier who made dad jokes at press conferences, wore BC Ferries jackets unironically, and somehow managed to have the vibe of a high school social studies teacher who lets you swear as long as it's used in context. And after a decade of neoliberal cosplay, that felt revolutionary. Let's start with the crowd pleasers. He canceled bridge tolls, a move that instantly boosted his approval rating among commuters, suburbanites, and anyone who's been rage paying their way through the Port Man like it was a cover charge for basic infrastructure. He also raised the minimum wage, expanded childcare access, and froze rent increases during the pandemic, which in Vancouver is basically the political version of walking on water. During the COVID pandemic, Horgan became the calm, flannel-wrapped voice in your living room, like if Bob Ross had union ties and a thing for BC Hydro. He didn't always get it right. See long-term core chaos, weird mixed messaging, and maybe just don't hang out as official policy. But people trusted him. He talked like a guy who had read the manual, even if he occasionally misplaced it during a press conference. But not everyone was wholesome. Let's talk about the pipeline elephants stomping through the living room. While Horgan campaigned as a climate-conscious, indigenous ally progressive, his government gave the green light to the coastal gaslit pipeline, sparking protests, blockades, and disappointment that hit harder than a failed compost bin sort of a West Side dinner party. His defense? Jobs, the economy, and some vague, balanced approach that sounded eerily like corporate translation for "please don't cancel." The contradiction was hard to ignore. He was the premier who talked about reconciliation and then sent in the RCMP to arrest West Sootunan land defenders. It gave real "I support the movement but not the mess" energy, like showing up to a protest with a pre-written apology letter to Chevron. On housing, Horgan's government introduced the speculation and vacancy tax, ramped up non-profit housing funding, and talked tough on investors. A solid attempt at taking the real estate casino energy out of the Lower Mainland. But like every BC leader, he was up against decades of policy rot, boomer apathy, and municipalities who'd rather zone for infinity yoga studios than affordable apartments. Still, under Horgan, things felt possible. He made progressive policy sound reasonable, called out billionaires like a working class folk hero, and even managed to win over people who couldn't afford to live here, but still appreciated the vibes. His approval ratings soared not because he was flashy, but because he seemed like a decent guy who was actually trying. And when he announced his resignation in 2022 due to health issues and burnout, it hit like the end of a good sitcom season. Not perfect, not revolutionary, but comforting, competent, and oddly missed when gone. So what did John Horgan leave Vancouver with? Frozen rent during a global crisis, canceled tolls and expanded transit funding, mixed signals on climate justice and indigenous rights, a political vibe that felt human even when the policy got murky. In the end, Horgan wasn't your cool dad, he was your competent dad. The one who shows up, does the job, burns the steak once in a while, but never lets the roof cave in. And for a city like Vancouver, that was a breath of actual, breathable West Coast air. If John Horgan was the flannel dad trying to fix the deck with a level head and some duct tape, David Eby is the sleep-deprived eldest sibling who just stormed into the room yelling, "Okay, who messed this up and where's the screwdriver?" Appointed premier in 2022, Eby came in hot, not just with promises, but with legislation, urgency, and the exhausted energy of a man who has read every bad municipal housing bylaw in the province and decided, nope, not on my watch. Before becoming premier, Eby built his reputation as the guy who actually gave a crap about affordable housing, long before it was politically sexy. As Attorney General and Housing Minister, he was the one calling out corporate landlords, shady real estate practices, and that one developer who keeps building microlofts the size of your laundry hamper and calling it luxury. He was your mom's favorite tenant rights crusader, and your landlord's worst LinkedIn connection. And once he got the top job, oh, he didn't coast. No, Eby pulled a full-blown policy speedrun. In his first months as premier, he introduced a sweeping housing plan that included eliminating single-family-only zoning in cities, legalizing more density near transit hubs, and fast-tracking the construction of affordable and rental housing like Bob the Builder, but with legislative power and less singing. To be clear, this man declared war on NIMBYism. He stared down Vancouver's glacial zoning processes and said, "Why are we still pretending that million-dollar bungalows are sacred?" His housing legislation forced municipalities, many of whom were dragging their feet harder than a teenager at 8 a.m., to stop stalling and actually allow new housing to be built. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some local governments reacted like he just proposed turning every golf course into a rave. Urban planners clutched their heritage overlays. Wealthy homeowners organized town halls full of barely disguised panic. People who hadn't taken the bus since 1997 suddenly became concerned about transit-oriented density ruining the character of the neighborhood. But to many renters, younger voters, and exhausted Vancouverites living 6 roommates deep in a garden suite with mold and one working light bulb, Eby was a revelation. He didn't just talk about fixing the housing crisis, he flipped the table, rewrote the to-do list, and emailed the mayors directly with the deadline. Beyond housing, Eby's government has dipped into healthcare expansion, addiction and mental health response, and public safety reform. Though progress there has been slower, and critics have pointed out the ramping up police funding while still under-delivering on mental health support feels like putting out a fire by throwing a flashlight at it. His challenge is clear: reform the system without becoming the system. That said, Eby's entire political vibe is competent over charismatic. He's not cracking dad jokes or dropping Olympic torch metaphors. He shows up with the binder, an action plan, and carefully worded quote that says, "I know exactly how bad it is, and I have receipts." He's less campaign trail sparkle, more get-in loser, or fixing land use legislation. So, what has Eby delivered to Vancouverites so far? Actual measurable movement on zoning and housing supply. A premier who understands that affordable doesn't mean less than $3,000. A whole new era of municipal accountability with the side of no more excuses. The tiniest silver of hope that maybe, just maybe, this crisis is fixable. David Eby is the first premier in a long time who isn't afraid to get on Vancouver's nerves if it means actually solving a problem. He knows the housing market is broken. He knows the system is rigged, and he's pulling levers like a man who just bedrun every CMHC report from the last 15 years. So whether you love him, fear him, or are still trying to pronounce speculation tax, one thing's for sure: David Eby did not come to vibe, he came to build. So after 8 sections, 6 political rebrands, and what feels like a century's worth of infrastructure promises, zoning trauma, and press conferences with words like robust framework, what have we learned? Simply, if you live in Vancouver, you might think the city runs itself, but Victoria's been pulling the strings harder than a puppet show directed by a caffeinated economist. The BC Premier, no matter their vibe, be it Expo Daddy, Transit Ghoster, Chill Dad, or Policy Hawk, has always had a direct line into the daily chaos of your West Coast life. From Bill Bennett's Concrete Utopia cosplay to Gordon Campbell's Olympic-flavored capitalism, to David Eby's Fix It Now or I Personally Bulldoze the Zoning Code energy, every premier has dropped their legacy somewhere between a SkyTrain pillar and a condo launch party. They've shaped how you move through the city, thanks for the SkyTrain bill still waiting on cell service in the tunnels, how you live, or more accurately, how many roommates you need to afford your junior 1-bedroom plus vibes, who gets to stay in the city and who gets relocated to the Fraser Valley because the only thing they can afford is air, who gets, and yes, even how you feel about the future, whether cautiously optimistic, completely jaded, or aggressively refreshing BC housing listings like it's a sneaker job. What's wild is that most of us go about our day thinking, City Hall messed up again, when half the time it's the Premier's office doing a backflip with a budget while whispering municipal responsibility, babe. In Vancouver, we're a paradox, a city that wants to be affordable, livable, green, inclusive, progressive, while also defending a single-family zoning like it's a sacred birthright passed down from the urban planning gods. We want density, but not noise. We want climate action, but not if it blocks the mountain view. And navigating all that contradiction, that's the Premier's job. Or at least, that's the job we loudly blame them for every 4 years. So what's the takeaway? The next Premier could launch a renter's revolution or pave over the seawall to build a floating Amazon warehouse. Either way, if you live in Vancouver, you're on the ride. Whether you voted or just accidentally tuned into a press conference while waiting for Family Feud Canada to start. In the end, love them or roast them, we do both, BC's Premier has left and have left their fingerprints all over the city. Some built transit, some built towers, some built entire eras of debts, and some just built vibes. Here's to the next one. May they bring affordable rent, sensible transit, and enough meme content to keep us politically engaged through at least one more housing cycle. And just like that, the city's pulse slows, but the story doesn't stop. You've been watching ISVi, Imran Star Video, where voices come together and the city speaks back. We're a crew, not a single face, a movement, not a moment, and every episode that's built with you, for you, by all of us. From the seawall to the skyline, from underground voices to rooftop vibes. We're telling the stories that don't make the news, but make the neighborhood. If this episode hit, pass it on. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram. Drop a comment and tell us what your Vancouver sounds like. We're building this together, clip by clip, story by story, from 100 to 10,000 subscribers to wherever this takes us. When we get there, we all show up. So until the next drop, stay loud, stay collective, and stay in it. This is ISVi, signing off.